Hi everyone, my name is David Ogilvy, and this is the podcast where I explore what it means to live, feel, and work better. This week I'm joined by Emma and Louise from the team, and we're going to talk about something that affects everybody's health, wealth, and relationships in their life. We're going to talk about stress. Here goes. So, hi Emma, hi Louise, welcome to the Resilience Development Company podcast.
Hello to you both.
Yeah, hello. It's nice to have three of us on today, isn't it? Three of the four.
It is. Yeah, you've got the two women in your life.
Indeed. Right, indeed. And the topic today, we're going to talk about stress, aren't we?
Yeah.
We most certainly are.
Which is appropriate, really, given that what we've just been through to get this podcast going.
It was very stressful.
It was very stressful, wasn't it? We had dogs.
Dogs barking.
Cameras not working. Mics not working. Technology not working.
Hair not looking right.
Hair not looking right, especially mine. Yep.
I was about to say mine. David's.
Yep. So it was a bit stressful, wasn't it? Or was it? That's the question, is it?
That's always the good question.
Yeah, so it's appropriate that we're going to talk about stress today. And it's just going to be a free-for-all, isn't it? It's not planned or anything like that. We tend to help people with stress. So it's just let's get together and let's really talk about stress and what we think. So we probably should start with just defining stress, right? Even though we all know what stress is, right? Let's just define it as our body's response to pressure. That's what stress is. And it's massive, isn't it? Stress is massive. Even today, I've been on LinkedIn today. I did a post that was picked up by LinkedIn News. It was about the Sunday scaries. I don't know if you know what the Sunday scaries are, but the Sunday scaries are apparently when you dread going to work every Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I say I've never experienced that, really. I've had ups and downs, but I've never really experienced that. And what this article said was the biggest contributor to that was stress.
Yeah, workloads. Well, is it stress or is it the pressure that people are turning into stress? The pressure of all the things that you've got to get done that week. And I think a lot of it can come from rumination. You know, you can sit there, be thinking over and over again. You start off, some people even start off Saturday evening and they feel the weekend's already over because the next day's Sunday. And then it's Monday and I've got all this to do and I've got this to do, and it piles up. And all of a sudden they're internalizing and it's turning into stress. And that's where they start to, really fear this going in and stepping into the Monday morning blues.
It's strange because on that post as well, somebody asked me, is this the same for working from home? And my response was absolutely, because stress is perceived. It's very individual. So we should unravel it a little bit because we're used to this kind of language and talking. So pressure and stress are two different things, aren't they? As we know, right? Pressure is external. It's about those demands on us in our environment, like poor management, poor culture, heavy workloads, rising expectations of people, but they're external to us. Stress is something different. It's that internal response. And Louise, you used that word rumination, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that's the vital ingredient for stress. So it's probably worth talking about what rumination is and defining it for people.
Okay, so rumination is when you get hold of a thought and you play it over and 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 over again in your head. Now, it's only rumination, it's only pure rumination when you attach a negative emotion to it. In other words, it doesn't feel good to think about it. It feels quite bad. And that's then rumination. And that's what you can do. Start thinking about all the things, you were talking about, managers and workloads. Don't forget, you can also have external pressures put on you by family, friends, all the chores that you got to do. So it's not just work related, it's also related at home. And I often look at the pressures as like a to-do list. It's all the things you've got to get done and they're put on from you by demands from everybody else externally to you. Just got to work your way through it. Now, some people can take a big, long list of pressures and they can work well. Other people's list is a little bit shorter before they start internalizing it and turning it into stress.
It's interesting because if you said to people, are you pressured? Have you got pressures in your life? They'd say yes. And then if you say, well, are you stressed? Not everybody says yes, because it's missing that vital ingredient, that rumination. And I think it's important to point out, rumination it's not planning for the future. No. And it's not reflecting on the past. That's all really healthy. It's when you start to play over and over and over again in your head and attach that negative emotion to it. That's what causes stress. And I think that's what's going on with that Sunday scaries.
Yeah.
People are kind of ruminating and what ifing, aren't they?
Yeah.
What if this happens? Go on, Em.
Yeah, Mark Wetherall, who is a psychologist that studies stress, was measuring cortisol levels in people. And what was really interesting is it was to do with this scariest thing, this anticipatory bit where he was measuring, say, for example, on Saturday or Sunday, cortisol levels whilst people were ruminating on the Monday morning. And they found that the cortisol spike was still there. And so it's interesting because if your brain doesn't know the difference between real and imagined, you don't actually need to be there. It's just the thought, the rumination, the negative thoughts going round in your head where you're thinking, oh, I've got to go back in on Monday morning. I've got a massive project I've got to deliver. And so then you become stressed with the cortisol response there and then. So it's not even about being stressed at work. It's the physiological aspects of the fact that you're not at work, yet you're still having the stress response about work.
Yeah, you're fearing failure in the future now. That's how I think about it. You're kind of fearing that something's got to go wrong, but you're experiencing it now. And just go back to...
It's very, very real.
Yeah, and it's really as well about uncertainty. Because if you're not there and you are thinking about what's happening on Monday morning and you perceive you've got no control or you've blown it out of proportion, you can actually feel really stressed and you're not even at work.
Yeah. And you mentioned cortisol. Do you want to talk about that? What is it? Because there'll be people listening who don't, they'll be going, cortisol, what's that got to do with anything?
It's the brain's chemical that's produced when we feel stressed. So commonly, I suppose people see it as the fight or flight response, fight, flight or freeze. And it's when basically you get stressed.
And it's supposed to be getting you to do something, isn't it? Fight or flight.
Yeah, and get you to perform, really. So, I mean, again, this Mark Wetherall was saying that typically you'd see spikes of cortisol first thing in the morning. And it's because it's your body needs that extra bit of adrenaline and cortisol to get going. But it's really interesting because since I read that article, I've been really noticing when I wake up in the morning and I've started to feel that my heart rate is elevated. And I've started to have to take a breath and think, right, okay, why is this happening? You know, I'm not ruminating, I'm not worrying about anything, but that's happening. So it's interesting when you separate what you're thinking or what you're worrying about versus what your body's natural response is. But whichever way you look at it, it almost feels like it's counterproductive for well-being. Because if you wake up on a morning and your body's in stress response, you start to think, oh, I'm stressed.
Yeah, because cortisol as well, just to add on to that, it does a few other things in your body. So it shuts off your immune system. It's not good for because you mentioned well-being, it's not good for our well-being. Too much cortisol continuously, our immune system lowers, we can pick up things a lot quicker. It shuts off your digestive system. So your digestion isn't working as well. You can get, that funny feeling, that feeling in your stomach, but also upset stomachs and all that sort of thing. And then the last thing that the cortisol does is it shuts off 40% of the decision-making part of our brain. So when we are stressed and we've fed it with the rumination and the thoughts going round and round and round our head, we can't actually think clearly to get ourselves out of whatever we're thinking about. And our brain really thinks it's happening to us at that moment. We really feel that we're actually there. So yeah, it's like that vicious circle that goes round.
Yeah, it's why I say to people, it affects your health, your wealth, and your relationships, that stress response. Because left unchecked, right, it's designed to be used, isn't it? It's designed for either, run away or fight what's in front of you. So if cortisol is around in your system and it's not being used, it can affect your health over the long term, your digestive system. You can put on weight, that kind of thing. You could hear the dog.
Apologies for that. That's the little black chihuahua to anybody that's listening.
Yep, you can.
Who thinks he's a Rottweiler?
Yep. He does.
So health, wealth, and relationships. So health, because of your digestive system and your immune system. It can affect your health because it affects your productivity.
Yeah.
If your decision-making part of your brain, your rational part of your brain, is reducing by 40%, you're going to get that fuzzy thinking, that brain fog that people talk about, and then it's going to affect your relationships as well. So it affects all the big key things in your life, doesn't it?
I actually ruminate quite a bit naturally. So these skills are vital that we teach to deal with rumination. They're absolutely vital for me. But I also find they're the biggest waste of energy. So much of my energy can go into this thinking, this rumination that can lead on to me to catastrophizing. But not only mentally, but physically, it can take its toll on me as well. I can get absolutely exhausted just from being in a room on my own. My husband always says that I can have an argument with myself and a mirror in a room. Well, you want to stress me out. I don't even need a mirror sometimes. It's just me and my thoughts, and they can really get carried away.
What if?
What if?
And what if? And it's ironic, isn't it? Because kind of we're taught to think about the future, and we're taught to kind of look for risk and what if. And it's a brilliant strength. It was a brilliant strength in my career. But if you start to turn that inwards, it can really start to work against you. And then, Em, I want to bring you in, and I want to talk about stress and the relationship with mental health.
Yeah.
Oh, you froze a bit then.
Yes, literally went into fight, flight, or freeze. Yes. I mean, when you get stressed, like Lou said, your decision-making part of your brain shuts down, and also the fact that you just socially want to go into yourself. So it really is quite detrimental. I mean, you become snappy. It's not a good place to be in. So, people say, well, if you're stressed at work and you can keep it at work, or vice versa, you can't. It's all encompassing.
But if you've got long-term chronic stress, that's going to take you to burnout, and then you're in the realms of depression and anxiety, aren't you?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Scary place to be. I've suffered from anxiety myself before, and I think I've definitely now much improved. But I think what's really hit home for me is I really much focused on my mental health and addressing that to reduce anxiety. But what I forgot about was the physical aspects of it. So when you're stressed and when you're anxious, how debilitating it is for your actual body. So that's a consideration as well.
And listen, those of you that don't know, Emma's one of my best friends. Emma's married to David. But Emma and I, when we meet up a lot of the time, we can pick it up with each other. And we call it fizzing when cortisol is flowing through us. We call it fizzing. And we can sort of look at each other and just go, oh my goodness, are you fizzing? And I go, yeah, I've got this cortisol flowing through me. And you pick up on it. And then what happens is we do a little bit of group rumination together, because we then go, what are you worried about? And then I'll talk about it. And then Emma will talk about it. And then I'll talk about it. And then we eventually have to go, right, we've got to stop it. This is not getting us absolutely anywhere.
Yeah, that's social anxiety. And I was reading something the other day as well. And it was, again, it was a cortisol experiment, a stress experiment. And it was talking about when you're doing tasks in the workplace, and they can be complex or they can be, fairly light, and how naturally your brain produces cortisol because you get the stress response. But what was really interesting is when they asked those people to do the same tasks again, and they had somebody over the shoulder watching and saying, you need to go faster, or this isn't good enough, or there's a deadline going on, the cortisol levels absolutely spiked. And I thought, that's interesting, because that occurs every single day, at work, does it not?
Micromanaging.
And then, of course, yeah, and like you said, Lou, then your decision-making part of your brain shuts down. Never mind what happens to your relationship with that person who's, slave driving at the back of you. presumably as somebody that's at work, there's a deadline. It's not helpful to have somebody behind you going, there's a deadline, you need to hurry up, but we just don't realise we're doing it. And that actually linked them with the fact that you, David, talked about productivity earlier on. So you kind of think there's a social element as well, that awareness of actually, and like you saying, Lou, stress, it's contagious and you can feel secondhand stress. And also you need to be mindful that when you're stressed, you need to sort of make sure that you're not stressing everybody else out.
You're not reeking of it, as that's what you say to
Reeking.
me. Louise,
Reeking.
you're reeking of it today.
Yes.
Yeah, we're social animals, aren't we? So if one of us is alert to danger, the rest of us are, because I think what people forget is that in the oldest part of your brain, the reptilian part, you've got the amygdala. That's the danger radar. If it detects threat, that's when it sets off your stress response, right? And people often think it's all about this kind of prefrontal cortex logical bit in the front of your head. The oldest part, that reptilian part, overrides everything, doesn't it?
You revert back to habit.
Yeah, and I'd say what's interesting, because there must be some people listening to the Resilience Development podcast from the Resilience Development Company and listening to 3 resilience specialists and going, hang on a second. So you ruminate and you're talking about stress.
Yeah.
Aren't you resilient? Aren't you supposed to know that?
Yeah,
and
we are resilient.
Yeah, I think my response would be, resilience is not the absence of all of this stuff, is it? It's being able to recognize it and then move on from it. So,
and having tools and skills to be able to deal with it.
Yeah.
So for me, when I start to ruminate, I instantly go to tuning in. Am I ruminating? Just put a name to it helps. Yeah, and then I use some of our other skills.
Yeah, because even that common language, because, there's a lot of awareness and campaigns out there about going and talking to people and opening up, saying how you feel. But, anybody that's maybe stressed or has poor mental health knows that we don't always have the language in which we can articulate how we feel. And also bear in mind, it's a very vulnerable place. So, for example, being able to name when you're saying the same thought over and over your head and attaching a negative emotion to it, worrying, which we call rumination, we actually can have a bit of a laugh and a joke about it, as well as being able to dig deeper. So I think that's a huge power, isn't it, Lou?
It is huge. And one thing I always like to say to people is, especially with our program, we are resilience specialists. If we could take it all away, we wouldn't be sat in front of this podcast. We'd be on our yachts, sipping champagne, sailing around the world many, many times and having big, big events going on and goodness knows what. What we can do is give you a set of skills that helps you be able to deal with it, understand it, control it, and keep moving forward. Yeah, because there's always going to be stress. There is always going to be pressure in our lives. It's about learning how you work with it, not against it, and how you can get yourself out of it.
And it's why we start, really, isn't it, with stress when it comes to resilience on our programs.
Totally.
If it's left mismanaged, in the short term, it just affects your productivity and your decision making. So you're not going to accelerate anything else. In the long term, you're just completely into burnout. So it's really important to start to understand it. And I often find working with some people, and it tends to be more male than men than women, who say, I don't ruminate. I don't ruminate. And they do, what they mean is they think that they're planning.
Yeah.
Or they think that they're reflecting. And the interesting thing is, I often find working with people is generally people who ruminate heavily, they think it is planning, and it's because they care. They don't realize how it's working against them. So to sum up, what we're really saying is pressure is external. It's the external demands on us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Stress is completely different. It's internal. It's perceived. And there's a biological response. That's kind of where it starts with. But there's that thinking element to it as well, that cognition element.
And it affects us physically as well. We've said that, the upset stomachs and all this, but, also rumination is more sort of rampant. Just before you're going to go to sleep, your mind starts wearing. Or if you're of a lady of a certain age, like I am, when I wake up a couple of times in the night, And it can steal me. It can steal my sleep away from me. So it has real physical.
Yeah, shows you it's not the situation.
No.
It's how you perceive it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is how you perceive it. It's why telling somebody to just not get stressed is about as much use as a chocolate teapot.
Absolutely. I love that. Oh, just don't stress out. You're like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's also for me as well why sometimes I see that general well-being advice, and I'm not knocking it. It is good advice, but that go for a walk. Well, if you're ruminating and you go for a walk,
you'll ruminate all the way around the walk.
Yeah, it can make it worse, can't it? Is that right, Em?
Yeah, it can. Because you're not turning it into positive action, because once you're in the thick of it, you start to catastrophize. That's the recipe for burnout, really. You're not sharing anything. You're not coming to a solution. You're just sticking on it like a broken record. So, I often find people have actually had conversations with me about, I'm doing the advice. I'm going for a walk. It's making it worse. I can feel myself physically fizzing, and I'm not finding any solutions. So there's that real mental cognitive element of it, which we need to address, because there's no amount of jogging or walking that is going to address some of the elements in which we need to look at how we think about things and perceive things.
That's the bit that frustrates me a little bit about workplace stress. It kind of almost goes, well, just eat well, sleep well, drink well, and do something that you like. But actually, it's much more complicated than that. People have to know how they think and how they feel and how that all relates. And then there's the environmental stresses as well, because it's not good enough for workplaces just to bring in kind of stress management programs. You've got to look at changing the culture and how people interact with each other. Poor management, or rather management that's been asked to do a lot with a little, then passes on that second-hand stress that you were talking about earlier. And then we wonder why people are off ill. Because that is the impact of cortisol not being used, is it makes you ill. And it's frustrating that we know this, yet we don't seem to be acting on it. I don't think we've quite got there in the kind of workplace. I think we're still in the here's mental health.
And it's all got a... Sorry.
Go on, Lou.
No, it's all got a place, like you were saying earlier on, mindfulness and everything like that. But I always look at it as, if you're just treating it with well-being, you're parking the problem. You're just parking it, and you're filling your brain with perhaps something else. To actually be able to truly deal with it and to move on, you have to challenge it and understand it.
Which is kind of easier said than done, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think what we should do for anybody listening is we should really give them a few things, right? And we should point out that as we go, these are straightforward resilience skills, but they are not the be all and end all. Just some simple things. So, for example, one of the simplest things is the 4-7-8 breath.
My favorite.
Right? Yeah, it's one of mine. So breathe in for 4 through your nose, hold it for 7 in your mouth, and then breathe out for the count of 8 through your mouth. You're doing it now, aren't you, Lou? I can see you doing it. So
I can't help it.
I can't help it. It's somebody's saying to me.
Yeah, exactly. Such a professional, right? So, just again, breathe in through your nose for 4, hold it for 7, and then out for 8. Right, and that's proven, isn't it? There's a strong evidence base to prove that it slows your heart rate down.
Yeah, and it stops the stress response.
Yeah, because that
turns off the cortisol tap, as I call it.
Yeah, turns off the cortisol tap and the adrenaline, because that's what's happening. Everything's going faster, isn't it? Your heartbeat's getting faster, so that can switch off that amygdala. And I always think, whenever you feel stressed, that is the very first thing. Is remember to breathe, and breathe in a certain way. There are many other variations of it, but breathe in a certain way. And I can probably sense, I can feel Emma thinking, that's all right, but not if you're kind of anxious. The 4-7-8 breath is not great for people who are anxious. They might want to try a different type of breath then.
Yeah, it's very, I think it is quite different, because it can trigger your stress response if you have anxiety, but I'm not talking about just feeling anxious. I'm meaning if you've actually been diagnosed with anxiety and it's something that you have, as almost a clinical condition.
Which we're not going to cover here. Right.
No,
so I've got you.
Exactly.
So
we need another podcast for that one.
If you feel stressed, 4-7-8 breath.
Yeah.
What next, Lou? What else would we tell people?
I would definitely say to people that if you've got a thought going round and round and round your head, name it. Because if you can name it, you can then claim it and tame it. And you can also realise you're not on your own. There is a word for it. It's called rumination. It's called rumination. So I would definitely turn around and say, name it. And turn around and go, okay, that's what those 3 people were going on about on that podcast. I've got that thought going around my head. I am ruminating. And I'm not on my own. We all do it. It's a perfectly natural response.
Yeah, so you generally go, am I stressed? Yes. Am I ruminating? Yes. Okay, so we get that, right? Then what would you do? Is it fast forward?
I would turn around, yes. The next thing I would do is you need to bring yourself back into the present. Actually, sort of wake yourself up a little bit and go, okay, what am I ruminating about? Will it matter in a week? Will it matter in a month? Will it matter in a year? Because majority of the time the answer is no. It's not going to matter in the slightest. And you're bringing yourself back, you're asking yourself the questions, you're becoming awake, becoming more alert, because you ruminate when your mind is idle and it's off. It's off on its own little path, thinking it's doing you the world of good, and it's not. And then if you turn around and go, it's not going to matter, you can then ask yourself if you can drop the peanut. Just let it go, in other words. Just let it go. Let that thought go.
Yeah, we often put a lot of energy, mental and emotional, into things that just aren't going to matter.
No.
Are we? But we get so caught up in it in the moment. It was like for anybody listening earlier that stuck with us when the dog started barking.
Yeah.
I thought, I could feel myself going, I can't believe that. Because we want everything to look good, don't we? We want everything to be great. And then I thought, is this going to matter in a week? No, it's not even going to matter in a couple of days' time. It's not worth me putting any mental and emotional energy into it. I don't have enough mental and emotional energy as it is anyway. So I may as well save it for the stuff that really matters.
See, I go, that just shows that we're really human. The dog barking in the background. Do you know what? The world doesn't go how we want it to do. Stuff happens the whole time. It throws us curveballs, and resilience is about how you just knock the ball back out there and move forward. That's what I always say. But yeah, it is. Nothing can be perfect the whole time.
It shows you again the different responses to the same thing.
Yeah.
And it shows you why stress is an individual thing. Because we all think differently. And that's the thing I think about stress is nobody can hear you thinking.
Thank goodness.
No, that's what I mean. So that in a dialogue, if people could hear some of the things that I think, they go, what are you doing to yourself? That's not true. That's not going to matter in a week. Just need to drop it. And I go, yeah, okay. But we can't do that for ourselves.
No, we're very mean to ourselves, actually. Our internal thoughts, we would never actually say to other people. We'd never say them to other people because we wouldn't be that mean. But we can be very, very mean to ourselves.
Yeah. So what have we covered in this podcast, right? We've covered stress, right? We've defined it. We said it's how we react when we're under pressure or feel kind of threatened. And then we've drawn a distinction between pressure and stress. Pressure is external. It's the demands that are placed on us externally. Stress is internal. So we've talked about that stress response, and we've talked about rumination. When you play something over and over and over in your head, attach a negative emotion with no positive action. And we've talked about that fight or flight response, that adrenaline and cortisol that's released. And then I think we've talked about the fact that when we are stressing, if we don't do anything about it, it affects our health, our wealth, and our relationships.
Yeah.
So it impacts all over the place. And then we jump to, well, okay, it's all right talking about stress because there's a lot of talk about stress, not necessarily a lot of action. We talked about it in the workplace and how well-being general advice kind of sits around there, but it's not enough. And we suggested as a starter for 10, take a 4, 7, 8 breath.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, fast forward, ask yourself, will this matter in a week? Either a month or a year. You might want to take it out a little bit longer. And then if the answer is no, save yourself a lot of mental and emotional energy by what we call dropping the peanut, just letting it go. Or Disney princesses, that's the other one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let it go.
Frozen.
Yeah, not going to sing it, but
No.
that's the broad idea. But it doesn't stop there, does it? There's so much about stress. And if I think, we've out of our whole entire program of 65 skills, we've covered 2 or 3. But it's the start, isn't it? The start of stress. And I wish people would understand it a lot more because what I see, let's take mental health. First aid. I have no issue with mental health first aid, but it talks about stress buckets, and it talks about stress coming in at the top and finding ways to release stress. Like having hobbies and other things. It's all great advice, but it doesn't really talk about stopping the stress coming in the first place. And I think that's where the conversation needs to go next. It needs to happen at an organizational level. It needs to happen at a community level and a corporate level. And it needs to happen at an individual level. Because I like what you always say, Emma, is stress, mental health, it's a community issue long before it's a clinical issue.
Yeah.
It starts with teaching people skills and understanding how we work.
Absolutely. And also because, we have, like you said, a program of skills which are layered, and they're there to create habits, which is why it's a weekly program and it makes sense. And what's amazing is if you teach these, we have indeed taught these same skills in school and we've also taught it to, say, for example, chief execs in global businesses. And what's so delightful to see is the students, they just take it on and they start to use it, and it helps them in key times in their life when they're so stressed, year 10 doing GCSEs or A levels, where they've got all sorts of social pressures as well as academic. And if it's getting those skills in really early, that then would enable us to change the way that we view and manage our mental health. And then we wouldn't be having conversations about productivity and burnout in the workplace, because we would have that language and those skills and that framework in order to talk about it and address it.
Yeah.
So
and I always sorry, Em.
No, so go on.
Yeah, because I always think like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Totally. And we're getting into realms of mental health and why we exist and all sorts of things there. And we could go on forever. Could absolutely go on forever. And I think where we should leave people is, my observation is this, is if you ask anybody, could they just do with a little bit of less stress in their life? We all know what the answer is. And my hope for this podcast, anybody listening to it, is you just take those few skills that we've talked about, 4, 7, 8 breath, asking yourself, will this matter in a week? Because this sounds so simple, but for many people, they can make a big, big difference. A big difference. So we should do more of this.
Yeah.
And I think we'll definitely do more of this. We just need to think of different subjects. And it's great to see Emma on it, because we know it's not your favourite thing, but we know you've got plenty to say. So we want to get more of that out. So thank you, Lou. Thank you, Emma. And I'll see you all soon in about a few minutes, actually.
Most probably in a meeting. But take care to everybody out there and see if you can stress just a little bit less.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we've enjoyed creating it. And I'd like you to do 2 things. Number 1 is, if you think stress is negatively affecting you in your life, please do get in touch. We can help. And number 2, help us grow. Share this podcast, tell your friends about it. We really would appreciate it.